Allow me to paint a brief picture for you. It is December 9th, 2021. I'm at my job, toiling away, making slightly above average food, sold at significantly above average prices to be sold to old vacation goers. The only thing keeping my sanity in check is a continuous stream of video game announcements being delivered directly to my retinas. No salvation, of course, but at the very least, a bulwark, a temporary distraction from my daily trials. Of course, little did I know of the horrors that awaited me.
Last year, one indie game won multiple game awards, and now they're back in a totally new, unexpected way.
I was in shock. I couldn't believe my eyes. Who asked for this? Who was responsible for this affront to all gamer kind? It must be a mirage, an illusion. My exhausted eyes playing tricks on me, and yet, as sure as I was still standing, it remained. A horrific blot on my entire reality. And as I tried to scream, to cry my anguish into the heavens above, in the desperate hope that whatever God could allow this to happen would offer up some sort of explanation, all that escaped my wretched lips was laughter. Little did I know that deep into the following year, this would effortlessly become one of the largest VR releases of 2022. Not only would it sell 1 million copies in just 2.5 months, it would be nominated for VR Game of the Year just a week after its launch. What can I say? Competition was slim last year. Alright, in case you're one of the 3.5 people that still haven't heard of the funny space game in current year, let's sum this up real quick. Here we go. Anywhere from 4 to 10 players are placed in a match. Depending on player count, either 1 or 2 of these players will be designated the imposter, with all other players taking the role of crewmate. As crewmates, your job is to slowly repair the ship, and as well as discover and vote out the imposters. As imposter, your goal is to slowly but surely kill every crewmate on the ship, all while keeping your identity hidden and sabotaging major systems to hinder their progress in completing all of their tasks. Okay, you're caught up. The main balance here is simple and immediately obvious. There's a lot of these guys, but they have no information compared to these guys, and also can't fucking teleport. Meanwhile, these guys have a lot of tools at their disposal, like aforementioned teleporting and sabotage, but there's only 2 of them. So as soon as you switch from gameplay to meetings, all power is stolen from them, and they have to lay low, play the social game, because the alternative is to eat vacuum. Fake gamer! Die! So yeah, so far so Among Us. If you played on your iPod Touch on the way to middle school, you know all of this already. What we need to know is what changes have been made to adapt this game to take advantage of virtual reality. If you're trying to sell this in a market where players already have access to a very similar experience, and yeah, they do, then you really need to sell me on the fact that your virtual reality version is worth paying twice as much for. So what do you got for me? The first thing that will hit your senses will not stun your eyes, but in fact your ears.
It's blue.
I'm
It's
over
so
here.
blue.
Are you purple 10?
Kai,
what's
bro,
up, man?
start the game. Start that game.
Yes, sir.
I'm starting it.
Proximity voice chat is now built in. It's almost like the 7-year-olds are really in the room with you. Truly, technology has peaked. In terms of visuals, while everything is rebuilt from the ground up in 3D, it's all reminiscent of the original. All environments are simple, with bright colors and high contrast. Everything is harshly cel-shaded, with thick black lines. Unfortunately, you're going to have your face in your map most of the time, so you won't exactly be looking at these fun environments, but they're still nice to have. All your little Among Us people are just as chunky as you would expect. This amount of stylization means the performance is a non-issue. You can run this game flawlessly on a graphics card from nearly a decade ago, and more importantly, completely standalone Quest 2. All of this does have the added side effect of making everybody feel fucking gigantic. Trust me, explaining the genuinely frightening experience of turning the corner to see a 6-foot Among Us is a task I didn't think I would have until I was finally fitted for a straitjacket at the local tailor. For some reason, I always thought they were kind of small, but no, it's confirmed they are human-sized. Makes this shit a lot scarier, doesn't it? Mechanically, if you've played the base game, you'll feel right at home. Pretty much everything has been preserved, as well as one could imagine. With one glaring exception. Tasks have all been redone to be fully interactable. You don't click on those buttons, you molest them with your big fat Amogus finger. You turn wheels to pilot the ship, you drag and drop your wires around, it's all very tactile. No real depth has been added compared to using a mouse or a touchscreen, especially considering you can just point your controller and do everything that way, but it still deserves to be noted. Similarly, on the imposter side of things, everything has been preserved. You have your ability to turn people into mincemeat, but it's on a cooldown. You can sabotage doors and other systems on your minimap, and teleport through vents to catch unsuspecting victims, albeit with all of these actions done through a single button press. We'll get to that. At the end of a round, all players are teleported back to a center room where you can compete to yell at each other the most convincingly, until it's time to point at the big TV screen and decide the lucky fella who gets to asphyxiate in the cold darkness of space today. The only thing missing in the lineup is cams. Yeah, they're just gone, presumably for hardware reasons to make it run on Quest 2 and older cards. They could probably have made it work on the PC version, but you need feature parity for that sweet crossplay, so this is the sacrifice. If it's for hardware reasons, that's very understandable, but ultimately it is a pretty big gameplay feature no longer present. It served a very important function, that being a way to give crewmate players a way to contribute if tasks were completed, and was an added risk to force imposters to be more strategic about where they kill. But other than that, it really is just business as usual, and you know what? That's fine. As cringe as it is to say in the current year, the game is just as fun as it's always been. Nothing super captivating, but playing with randoms is still enough to bring you some enjoyment on a Saturday night, but this time alone in your room with a phone on your head. Which does unfortunately mean it's time for the turnaround. Among Us benefits basically none from being in VR. Too often I see statements on the internet about how virtual reality is the future of gaming and how every game should support VR and how monitors will be dead forever.
It's shocking to know how many flat screen patty cake gamers are out there without even a single clue of how much better this really is. And that is not my opinion. VR is just better.
God, stop it, please! If you told me to give you a textbook example of VR games not being an inherent improvement, it would be Colossal Cave, but this is a close second, and it illustrates the concept pretty elegantly. Nothing within our midst virtual excursion is bad. It's a competent product, it's well made, but it also suffers from a level of indentured servitude to the original game that causes it to adamantly refuse to make any meaningful changes to function better in a new medium. The result is that when I look at this game, instead of seeing a competent product, I just see wasted potential. The vast majority of improvement here is for crewmates. Like I said, all tasks have been remade to be physically operable, and the emergency button is physical as well. Unfortunately, this is the extent of physical interaction present. And again, this can be entirely circumvented just by pointing. While there isn't much you can change for our 8 good boys, I feel like this is an area where minimal gesture controls could have been implemented for a great effect. Instead of making me vote on a screen, let me hit somebody with a thumbs down like I'm fucking executing a gladiator. Come on, Iron Man VR can perfectly switch between firing primary and secondary weapons based on just the angle of your hands. Give me something! It's also worth pointing out that kill animations for crewmates absolutely remain in the game, and this is very jarring. There you are, pointing away at your wires or whatever, and all of a sudden, you've been teleported to space, your view is completely changed, and you watch yourself die in third person, and now you're back as a ghost. If Resident Evil 4 gets flack for this, then so does Among Us, and at least RE4 had the very legitimate excuse that it is a port of a game made from 2005. Unfortunately, Imposter fares far worse. Little to none of Imposter gameplay has been changed at all. Kills are a single button press, vents are a button press, then left and right on the analog stick. Sabotaging is pointing and clicking on a minimap. There's no way around it. This feels more like a VR mod of an existing game. An example of what I mean here would be the Outer Wilds VR mod. It's a great time, but direct interactivity is limited due to inherent limitations on what a modder can accomplish within the game's set restrictions. But this is a ground-up remake. It absolutely shouldn't have this issue. Give me a knife and let me stab people. Let me crawl around in vents that actually move around the ship. This would even work well with the proximity chat, spying on people from within the ventilation shafts. Give me a little box to hold onto with buttons to sabotage major systems. Just give me something. Anything, please. But even aside from all this, surely being in VR alone is enough, right? To a lot of people, the change in perspective should be enough to sell them on this shiny new VR experience. It should be treated as a new way to experience the same game, and that alone should be enough to justify its existence, surely. However, while normally I would agree with such sentiments, I actually think this is a bit of a special case, and to be extra fair for my explanation, I'm only going to use VR ports of games that existed before and are sold on the Quest platform. In cases like this, it's really important to boil games down to the real core of their experience. Take Grid Legends, which launched on Quest 2 early this year. Grid, for all its graphical shortcomings, is all about going fast in your car. Physically seeing the poorly rendered environment speeding past you as you zoom past competitors pretty inherently enhances the experience. Or for another example, Layers of Fear. Is it really that good of a game? No, not really. But those cheap jump scares sure do hit a lot harder 3 inches from your face than they do 3 feet away on your monitor. And for the linchpin, literally every VR shooter, but to stick with the promise I made earlier, I'll use RE4 again. Being able to physically handle and reload all your weapons, being able to take cover and peek your corners and dual wield without the need for specialized systems, the fact that just the move to VR means that Leon's movement is upgraded to the point where he is now an Olympic sprinter compared to the original game, that's transformative, baby. What is the core experience of Among Us? It's a social deduction game. The act of social deduction does not change when you strap it to your face. Maybe it could be in an alternate reality where your entire player base has access to a PC, a Quest Pro, laser base stations, and anywhere from 3 to 7 Vive trackers, but that is absurd. At the end of the day, the fun that comes from putting all the information together and catching the villains red-handed is exactly the same on your computer, phone, console, and yes, a VR headset. So yeah, maybe it doesn't benefit as much from being VR specifically, but still, at least it's cheap, right? I mean, 10 big ones for a remake of the entire game? For a remake of the entire game? It's finally time for the elephant in the room. $10 for Among Us VR seems fine in a vacuum, downright cheap even, but it's so pitiful in the context of all the issues I've laid out so far, alongside its lack of content. It's twice as much money as normal Among Us, and has 1/4 of the maps, and the one map it has is missing functionality in the form of cams. A minuscule fraction of the cosmetics, some of which were cut out as day 1 DLC, what the fuck, and no custom settings to speak of. I hope you like to play with confirm ejects on, because if you don't, simply get bodied. So to reiterate, Among Us VR is a game at a higher price point with a fraction of the content that doesn't benefit from any inherent qualities of being adapted to VR and has changed almost zero to accommodate the media. I have no idea why the sizable player base goes to the trouble of getting in their VR setup to play this over the original game, especially those with an older tethered headset that requires base stations and a million wires, and when you can play the entire game for $0 on mobile devices. But this isn't the end. While this is the state of the game at the time of writing, it won't always be. Among Us VR has a lot of confirmed post-launch support, mainly in the form of a roadmap posted in December of last year for 2023. At the very least, it looks like my issues with the amount of content will be starting to be resolved with custom settings coming soon, as well as a new map coming within the next couple months. I shit you not, as I was writing this, I checked to see if there were any updates on the website, and they teased the new map yesterday. Also expect like 1 million more hats to be sold to you piecemeal. I have to say, the future looks bright for our boys in space. But for now, I can only review what can actually be purchased. And where this is where you might expect me to be very harsh based on all I've talked about, I'm actually going to ease up a bit. Like I said before, this is still a competent product, and there's still fun to be had here. At the end of the day, while it's not nearly as good a deal as its non-VR counterpart, $10 isn't going to break the fucking bank. And hey, on Steam and the Oculus Store, you get 2 hours to give it a shot and still return it if you don't think it's worth it. Overall, it's a fine game that will at the very least give you a couple hours of cheer. After all, my goal here wasn't to lambast an indie dev team for a horrifying failure, because it's not one. I just want more people to really think about what makes a good VR game, and that maybe not every game would be better when it's in your headset instead of on a monitor. 5 out of 10, no more, no less. See you next time.